welcome to our channel. If this is your first visit or you have not yet done so, please hit the like and subscribe buttons so that you don't miss any future videos. Now, we are currently in the midst of a series of videos that are working through Christian spiritual disciplines. And we're doing that based on the list that is suggested by Richard Foster in his book, Celebration of Discipline. Now, the last discipline that we looked at was the discipline of submission. And that discipline engages our attitude towards others, and most specifically towards God's guiding and plan for our lives. The next discipline, the one we're going to look at in this video and the next couple of videos, service, is the practical outworking that comes from the posture of submission. Now, before we get too far into exploring service, I want to be very clear that this is a discipline that can be a lot of work, and often it is done so with little or no recognition for that work. Of course, though, that is the idea. But if you are serving for recognition, you are not really serving, and you certainly are missing the point of this discipline as you grow in faith as a Christian. Serving others. It is a concept, an idea that we should all be pretty familiar with. The idea of doing something nice for someone else. Or maybe we take our understanding even one step further and allow the word to conjure up images of paid staff in fancy mansions. Sometimes we think of it as a tit-for-tat concept. You scratch my back by serving me, and I'll scratch yours by returning the favor. Maybe this is an area that you already shine in, and you actively look for ways to honestly and genuinely serve those around you without any expectation of reward. And if that is the case, then good on you, and let me encourage you to continue to keep on serving in that way. But for most of us, long-term and consistent service is difficult to maintain. At some point, we just get tired and selfishly want a little bit of recognition for all the stuff that we have been doing. And it's okay to be there, but it's not okay to stay there. And as we work through this discipline of service, I hope that will encourage you to move beyond the selfish desire to the selfless desire. Now, if we really want to get a firm understanding of just what is being asked of us when we are called by Jesus to serve, we need to understand the concept of service, and we need to understand the times in which Jesus was speaking. In Jesus' day, and in fact, in all of the biblical historical narrative and context, servants were a small step above slaves. Servants were quite often slaves who had proven themselves reliable, or who had chosen to remain in the service of their master once their debt had been paid off. Now, some cases you'll read about servants with authority and servants with responsibility. Don't be deceived by that. Yes, they had those things, but they still were not free. They still were owned and controlled by another individual. Their service was not willing. Their service was forced and coerced. A servant had often the lowest position in the household, and those servants in those low positions got the privilege of doing the least desirable tasks. And in a culture that was concerned with social position, the goal was always that if a person could not be on the top rung of the ladder, they would certainly do their best to not be on the bottom. And that cultural context of trying to be the top dog was what Jesus turned upside down when he taught his disciples about being a servant. Now, in Matthew chapter 20, verses 25 to 28, we find Jesus teaching his disciples about the position of serving others. Now, just prior to those verses, we hear that James and John, the sons of Zebedee, we hear that their mom has come to petition Jesus for her boys to be sitting at his right-hand side and his left-hand side, to have essentially the number 1 and number 2 spots in the hierarchy and the pecking order of the disciples group. They wanted this prestige. This was important to James and John. But Jesus turns it all around on them, and he uses that selfish moment of James and John to teach the whole group about how they should view their relationship to those around them. Listen to what Matthew says. But Jesus called them together and said, "You know that the rulers in this world lord it over their people, and officials flaunt their authority over those under them. But among you it must be different. Whoever wants to be a leader among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first among you must become your slave. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others and to give his life as a ransom for many." See, the Son of God, divine in human form, did not come to be served by his creation, but to be of service to creation, to be a service to us as people. Likely we don't deserve that, but that is the posture and the position that Jesus came and he took, and what he was trying to get across to his disciples. But they didn't quite get it. And again, Jesus had to model for them what this idea of servanthood looked like. And we find this in John chapter 13. It is the Last Supper before Jesus' crucifixion. And listen to what Jesus records in chapter 12, or in verses 12 to 17. He says, "After washing their feet, he put on his robe again and sat down and asked, 'Do you understand what I was doing? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, because that's what I am. And since I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you ought to wash each other's feet. I have given you an example to follow. Do as I have done. I tell you the truth, slaves are not greater than their master, nor is the messenger more important than the one who sends the message. Now that you know these things, God will bless you for doing them.'" See, when Jesus arrived on this particular Passover meal, he found his disciples. These are the guys, remember, who have spent the last 3 years watching what Jesus did, listening to what Jesus taught, to following Jesus around from place to place, and experiencing all that he was about. He found them all lying around the table with dirty feet because there was no servant nearby to wash the feet properly, and they all considered that to be a job that was beneath them. So Jesus picked up the towel and demonstrated what the heart of service and humility were all about. So the truth about being a servant in God's economy is not that you are a second-class citizen or counted as a slave, and a slave meaning someone who is not free for themselves, but that you are, in fact, free to serve. Not because you have to, but because Jesus has set you free in order to choose to. It is an action that comes from a deep love for God and an obedience to him. In developing the discipline of service, you are free to not be bound by where you stand in relation to those around you. You are free to desire the things of God first, and in doing so, to be free to serve and lift up those around you because of God's great love for them as well. See, I want you to be clear on this. A servant in our context isn't free to make those choices, but you and I, we are free to choose to humble ourselves, to choose to put others ahead of ourselves, to choose to look and say, how would Jesus want me to act? How would Jesus look and view this situation? Where can I give of myself freely and willingly? Not because it is expected, not because I am coerced, but because I want to do so. Because I like the people around me, because I want to be obedient to Jesus. That's what the freedom is. The Apostle Paul modeled for us this freedom, and he spoke about it in 1 Corinthians chapter 9. And specifically in verses 19 to 27, but I'll encourage you to read the whole chapter. But when you do, read and pay close attention to verses 19 to 27 of 1 Corinthians chapter 9. I'm not going to read them here, but the general gist is that Paul who really, of all the apostles, shouldn't be serving, he should be the one being served, found his freedom in Christ, and then turned around and chose in that freedom to be the servant to everyone he came across, to put them first, to meet with them on their terms, and to speak with them about Jesus in ways that they would connect with. He was a slave to Christ, meaning that he was free to choose to be a slave to Christ, and free to choose to serve the world in Jesus' name. Well, this is probably more than enough for us to chew on for the time being. Join me for the next videos as we begin to take a more careful look at how the discipline of service is developed and lived out in the action in our everyday lives. We'll look forward to seeing you then. Bye for now.